In the late 17th century BCE, during the reign of King Amisadika, a scribe named Ipik Aya pressed a reed stylus into wet clay in ancient Mesopotamia. He was not writing a prayer. He was copying a story about the moment a council of beings decided humanity was not worth saving. Those tablets were buried for 3,000 years beneath the ruins of Nineveh, pulled from the earth by British excavation teams and delivered to the British Museum in London. Today they sit behind temperature-controlled glass in a quiet gallery. Tourists pass them every day without stopping. They do not know what those symbols say, and they do not know that satellites orbiting Earth right now are measuring exactly the phenomenon those tablets described 4,000 years ago. The text carved into those tablets is called the Atrahasis Epic. It is one of the oldest written narratives in human history. The earliest surviving copy dates to the reign of King Amisadika of Babylon, roughly 1646 BCE. For centuries, the full story was fragmented and incomplete, scattered across museums and private collections in pieces too small to read. Then in 1965, two scholars at the University of Oxford changed everything. Wilfred Lambert and Alan Millard assembled and translated the most complete version of the text ever published. Their work, released through Oxford University Press, gave the world its first real look at what those tablets contained. What they found was not a simple myth. It was a detailed, structured, layered narrative describing a civilization of powerful beings, a labour crisis, the engineering of a new species, and a sequence of escalating catastrophes that ended in a flood meant to erase all human life from the earth. The tablets open with a world that already exists. Great gods of ancient Mesopotamia, called the Anunnaki, preside over a structured hierarchy. Beneath them serves a lesser class of divine beings called the Igigi. These Igigi are not rulers, they are workers. The tablets describe them digging canals through the river valleys of the Tigris and the Euphrates. They dredge riverbeds, they haul tall soil, they maintain irrigation channels that feed the settlements of the gods. They do this for thousands of years without rest. And then they reach a breaking point. The Igigi burn their tools, they surround the dwelling of the chief god Enlil in what the tablets describe as a full revolt. It is a divine labour strike complete with confrontation and demands. To resolve the crisis, the god Enki proposes something radical. A new species will be created from clay mixed with the blood of a sacrificed god named We'ila. That species is humanity. The tablets are explicit about the purpose of the Humans are designed as replacement workers, built to carry the burden that the lesser gods refuse to bear. But the story does not end with creation. It escalates. Humanity multiplies. Villages appear along the banks of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers in the flat, fertile plains of southern Mesopotamia. Cities rise from the floodplains, populations grow, and according to the tablets, the noise of human civilization begins to disturb the gods. The word used in the original Akkadian text is uburu. Scholars who have studied this term note that it does not describe a single shout or a moment of chaos. It describes a deep, persistent building disturbance, something that accumulates over time, something that grows louder with each passing generation until it becomes unbearable. The god Enlil cannot sleep, he cannot run, he demands silence. And when silence does not come, he decides to reduce the human population. But he does not start with the flood. The tablets describe a deliberate sequence of escalating catastrophes, each one more severe than the last. First comes plague. Bodies fill the narrow streets of ancient settlements. Then comes drought. Rivers shrink to dry beds. Crops wither in fields of cracked dust. Then comes famine. Entire populations hollow out from starvation. Each time the god Enki detects what is coming before it arrives. Each time he secretly warns a man named Atrahasis, whose name translates to extra wise. Atrahasis organizes prayers and rituals that temporarily reverse each disaster. And each time Enlil grows more furious. Enki has broken ranks. He has undermined a plan that all the gods agreed to. The conflict between these two beings drives the entire narrative forward. One god wants humanity erased, the other believes humanity still has value. That tension reaches its breaking point when Enlil convenes the full divine assembly. He gathers the Anunnaki and presents his case. The noise will not stop. Every intervention has failed. Every attempt to reduce the population has been sabotaged. He demands a final solution. A flood so total that it will wipe every living human from the face of the earth. The assembly deliberates. The majority votes yes, but Enlil adds one more condition. Enki must swear an oath. He must promise not to warn any human of what is coming. Then something remarkable happens. Before the floodwaters rise, the Anunnaki leave. They ascend above the destruction. They position themselves beyond the reach of the catastrophe they authorized. They are not caught off guard. They are not victims of their own decision. They detect the event before it begins, and they evacuate upward. They watch from a place of safety as the waters consume everything below. Meanwhile, Enki finds a way around his oath without technically breaking it. He does not speak to Atrahasis directly. Instead, he stands beside the thin reed wall of the house where Atrahasis sleeps and speaks to the wall itself. He instructs the wall to relay the message. Tear down the house, build a vessel, seal it with pitch, load your family and your animals aboard. The warning is delivered through an indirect channel, passed through a physical barrier as if it were a coded transmission. Atrahasis obeys. He builds the vessel, he seals it, he loads everything inside. The flood arrives, the world is destroyed, and when the waters finally recede, only Atrahasis and those aboard survive. That story was carved into clay nearly 4,000 years ago. For most of recorded history, it was treated as mythology, a cautionary tale, a spiritual allegory. But in the last 2 decades, a series of independent scientific discoveries has made it increasingly difficult to dismiss the structural architecture of what those tablets describe. In 2021, a team of researchers published a landmark study in the journal PLOS ONE. They analysed infrasonic signals recorded before more than 100 strong earthquakes across the globe. What they found was striking. Before every major seismic event, the Earth emitted low-frequency sound waves. These waves operated at frequencies near 1,000th of a hertz. For comparison, the lowest sound a human ear can detect is around 20 hertz. These signals operate at ultra-low frequencies, far below what our ears can register as sound. While humans cannot consciously hear them, they are a fascinating area of study for understanding the physical stresses building up along an active fault line. But they are real, they are consistent, and they carry specific information about the developing fracture, the stress accumulating at the fault line, and the elastic properties of the surrounding rock. The researchers describe these infrasonic precursors as having a stable timescale. The signals appear before earthquakes of every significant magnitude. They are, by scientific definition, warnings. The Earth produces a sound before every major rupture, and standing on the surface, a human being hears nothing at all. But the signal does not stop at the ground. It climbs. It climbs. In 2019, a team of scientists led by Angelo De Santis published their findings in scientific reports, part of the Nature Research family. They had analysed 4.7 years of data collected by the European Space Agency Swarm satellite constellation orbiting the Earth at altitudes between 400 and 500 kilometres. The satellites measured electron density and magnetic field fluctuations in the ionosphere, the electrically charged layer of the upper atmosphere. What the team discovered was that clear concentrations of electromagnetic anomalies appeared in the ionosphere starting nearly 2 months before major earthquakes, continuing until just days before the ground actually ruptured. The Earth was broadcasting a signal into space, and it was doing so weeks before anyone on the surface felt a tremor. The physical model that explains how this works is called the lithosphere-atmosphere-ionosphere coupling framework. Scientists Sergei Pulinets and Dimitar Uzunov have spent decades building this model. The chain reaction begins deep underground. Stress accumulates along a fault line. Microfractures propagate through bedrock. Radon gas escapes from the fractured stone and rises to the surface. That radon ionizes the surrounding air, stripping electrons from molecules near the ground. The ionization triggers thermal anomalies at the surface and alters the electrical conductivity of the lower atmosphere. These disturbances propagate upward, layer by layer, through the troposphere, through the stratosphere, until they reach the ionosphere and alter the electron density that satellites can detect from orbit. It is important to note that this process remains an active area of scientific research and debate. Probabilistic correlations have been found, but no deterministic earthquake prediction method has been established. The signal is real, its reliability as a forecasting tool is still being tested, but the physical chain from underground stress to ionospheric anomaly has been measured, modelled and documented. Now consider what happens to the living creatures on the surface when that invisible chain begins to fire. In 2011, motion-triggered cameras installed throughout Yanachaga National Park in the remote highlands of Peru began recording something unusual. Over a period of 23 days before a magnitude 7 earthquake struck the Contamina region, animal activity in the park declined dramatically. The cameras, positioned along jungle trails and near watering holes, captured fewer and fewer animals each day. Birds disappeared from the canopy, rodents vanished from the forest floor, medium-sized mammals stopped crossing open ground. By 5 to 7 days before the quake, the cameras recorded no animals at all. The forest had gone completely silent. Researchers led by Rachel Grant, publishing in Physics and Chemistry of the Earth, found that nighttime ionospheric perturbations detected by very low-frequency radio sounding equipment appeared above the earthquake zone starting 2 weeks before the event. Some researchers hypothesized that these animals might be responding to pre-seismic disturbances, such as positive airborne ions or low-frequency vibrations. However, behavioral biologists emphasize that a definitive link between animal movement and specific satellite-measured ionospheric anomalies is still highly speculative and unproven. This was not a one-time anomaly. In 1975, in the Chinese city of Haicheng, a city of roughly 1 million people in Liaoning province, animals across the region began behaving in ways that alarmed local authorities. Snakes crawled out of the frozen ground in the middle of a bitter winter. Dogs howled without provocation for hours. Horses refused to enter their stables. Chickens would not roost. Officials monitored these reports alongside months of data showing changes in groundwater levels and land elevation. They made a decision that had almost no precedent in modern history. They ordered a partial evacuation of the city. On February 4th, 1975, a magnitude 7.3 earthquake struck Haicheng. Structures collapsed across the city, but because the evacuation order had been issued, an estimated 150,000 lives were saved. Reach back even further. In 373 BCE, in the Greek coastal city of Helis, on the Gulf of Corinth, the historian Diodorus Siculus recorded that rats, weasels, snakes, and centipedes abandoned their burrows and fled to open ground 5 days before a catastrophic earthquake and tsunami destroyed the city entirely. Helis sank beneath the waves and was not rediscovered for over 2,000 years, but the record of the animals fleeing survived. It is the oldest known European account of pre-seismic animal behaviour. Animals with broader sensory ranges have been reading these invisible signals for millions of years. They detect acoustic waves below 50 Hz. They sense minute changes in electrical fields. They respond to chemical cues released from stressed rock deep underground. And when the signal crosses a critical threshold, they do exactly what the Anunnaki did in the tablets. They leave. Now return to the text. The Atrahasis says the noise of humanity disturbed the gods. Scholars have traditionally interpreted Hubaru as a metaphor for overpopulation or moral corruption. But consider what that word literally describes. Persistent escalating disturbance, something that builds over time, something that grows louder until it becomes unbearable. While it is a fascinating creative exercise to map these modern scientific anomalies onto ancient epics, conventional historians point out that the Sumerian word Hubaru meant literal human noise, the bustling of overpopulation that annoyed a sleep-deprived deity. The story is a mythological explanation of human population control, not an encoded geophysical manual for seismic monitoring. Widen the lens. Approximately 12,800 years ago, something struck the northern hemisphere. Researchers studying this period have found layers of sediment across North America, Europe, and parts of the Middle East containing unusually high concentrations of platinum, iridium, microspherules, melt glass, and nanodiamonds. In recent years, proponents of the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis have published findings pointing to material they identify as shock-fractured quartz at multiple boundary sites. The proposed cause is a fragmented comet, possibly 100 kilometers wide, breaking apart and detonating in the atmosphere. The resulting airburst would have generated temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius, igniting wildfires across entire continents. Megafauna vanished. The Clovis archaeological culture disappeared from the record. Global temperatures plummeted into a near-glacial period lasting more than 1,000 years. It must be stated clearly that this hypothesis, known as the Younger Dryas impact hypothesis, remains actively debated. Many scientists have challenged the evidence and the methodology, but dozens of independent studies have since confirmed impact markers at boundary sites around the world. Something happened 12,800 years ago, and every major flood myth on Earth clusters around roughly this same window. The Atrahasis became the foundation for the stories that followed. The Epic of Gilgamesh, carved into tablets found in the same ruins of Nineveh, preserves the flood narrative through a survivor called Utnapishtim. The Hebrew Bible tells it through Noah. Greek tradition recorded Deucalion. Hindu scripture tells of Manu, warned by a fish to build a boat. Indigenous oral histories from the Pacific Northwest to the Amazon basin contain flood narratives with the same structural elements. A warning from beings with greater perception than humans, a chosen survivor who builds a vessel, animals preserved aboard, a world destroyed by water, a new beginning from the wreckage. These civilizations were separated by oceans and thousands of years. They had no documented contact with one another, yet they preserved the same story, not the same words, the same architecture. The tablets of the Atrahasis rest today behind glass in a quiet wing of the British Museum. Tourists file past the display cases every morning. Most glance at the cuneiform and see decoration. They do not see what Epic Aya pressed into that clay 3,700 years ago, in a language that was already fading when the Parthenon was built. He recorded a story about beings who could detect what humans could not, beings who sensed an invisible signal before destruction arrived, beings who gathered, deliberated, and chose to ascend before the waters rose. 3,700 years later, satellites circling the Earth at an altitude of 500 kilometers are measuring exactly the kind of signals he described. Infrasonic waves ripple through rock before every major earthquake. Electromagnetic anomalies climb through the atmosphere and reach the ionosphere weeks before the ground shakes. Animals across entire ecosystems go silent and flee, while earthquakes and floods are real planetary forces that have shaped human architecture and oral histories for millennia. The idea that ancient tablets contain encoded geophysical telemetry remains a modern thought experiment. The true legacy of the Atrahasis epic is not that it predicted satellite data, but that it captures our timeless human drive to find patterns, survive cataclysms, and record our place on a turbulent Earth. The question is not whether the signal exists. The question is what those ancient scribes were actually describing, and whether we are any closer to hearing what they heard.